All right, so my name is Dr. Natasha Kroom. I'm Assistant Professor of Higher Education at Clemson University, and I am your Scholarly Papers Chair for the 2018 conference. We wanted to do something a little differently this year in terms of, instead of sending you one more mass email, giving you an opportunity to engage in this way. If there are questions or concerns about what we're expecting with regard to the scholarly papers sessions. Also, we're trying to do things a little bit differently this year. So again, we wanted to provide a space for people to clarify anything that's unclear. So I'm going to provide you with some general information, some expectations for presenters, and expectations for contestants, and then I'll open it up for any questions or thoughts or concerns that folks have at that point. We shouldn't be on too long. It's not a ton. So some general information. All sessions are 50 minutes, which is the normal time, or regular time rather, for all of the sessions. All of the scholarly paper sessions are also in the Sheraton, Philadelphia downtown. So they are not in the convention center, and all scholarly papers are in the Sheraton. In general, the goal of the scholarly paper sessions is to engage with an audience around the ways in which the research matters for practice and to gather feedback about the usefulness, applicability, and relevancy of the work. Each paper should be considered an entry point into a larger discussion about the overarching topic and or problem of practice that's at the center of your research. So some expectations for presenters. Given the goal that I just stated, we'd like presenters to keep their presentation to 10 minutes each, leaving half an hour for a facilitated discussion. Let me note here also that if you've done a scholarly paper session at NASPA before, you probably remember that there were 3 papers per session before, and we've actually made it 2 papers this year to provide a little more time for discussion with the audience. Since 10 minutes is not very long at all, we'd like for presenters to focus on situating the problem, giving a brief overview of research design choices, and spending most of your time sharing your findings and implications for practice. So I'll repeat that. The bulk of your time should be spent sharing your findings and implications for practice, while also situating the problem and giving a brief overview of your research design choices, methods, methodologies, etc. Expectations for discussants. So before the session, discussants should read each paper and provide written feedback towards the goal of improving the work. Some sessions have 2 discussants, which will be new this year. It's something we're testing out. So one discussant might have a primary role of faculty or a primary role of administrator. And so if there are 2, we've paired one person who's currently a faculty member and one person who's an administrator. So each person has been chosen because of their expertise. So as a discussant, we expect that you provide your expert opinions where you can. Written feedback should ideally be provided by the session, but if you're unable to do this, we're asking that you get authors back their papers by March 14th. And we'll check in with people to make sure that they receive feedback on their work. Then for discussants, using what you've read from the work and your scholarly and practical expertise, it would be really helpful if you craft a set of questions that might serve as a discussion guide, particularly if no one in the audience has questions or comments. Now, I've been to a few scholarly paper sessions, and I haven't been to too many where no one has a question or a comment or a thought. But again, your role is to facilitate a larger discussion about the overarching topic using these 2 papers as an entry point. So having some guiding discussion questions would be really helpful. And the last thing I want to point out before I open it up for questions is that just to make it more clear about what the difference is between this, what we're envisioning for this time, and maybe what some of you may be used to with your academic conferences. So in the academic conference, usually the expectation, right, is that the researchers present and then the discussant spends the majority of the remaining time giving their expert feedback, and then there's very little time usually for any kind of Q&A or engagement. So what we're asking is for you, instead of spending 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes after people present, instead of using that time to provide your feedback, that you will weave your expertise and feedback into the conversation where relevant, but spend most of that time facilitating a discussion. We really want this to be an experience where the audience engages in conversation that can result in researchers further considering the practical implications of their inquiry, because this is a practice-based conference. With all of that said, are there questions or concerns or things that I can address for you at this point?
Dr. Kroom, this is Raja. I'm wondering if there's an expectation that we'll have PowerPoints and stuff involved in our presentations, or is it really more just oral presentation?
Yes, so each room will be equipped with all of the technology in terms of a projector and the setup. So if you want to have a PowerPoint presentation or something like that, you can bring it and just make sure you get there a few minutes early so that it can get set up, so when the session starts, you can get rolling. There is no expectation that you have to have a presentation. I will say one of the things that we've been considering, and I don't know that we've completely ruled it out, but since there's such a short presentation time and the majority of the time is spent on discussion, we've been thinking about, are there other ways post-conference for people to continue engaging with folks around their paper or the topic? So, that might look like if you wanted to share some sort of PowerPoint or abbreviated paper, that you could do that in a virtual space. Although as a as a faculty member myself, whose main job is to write, I was kind of hesitant because I'm like, oh, they're not published yet. People are probably going to be less likely to share their paper more fully. But again, it's something we're still considering in terms of posts. So you don't need a presentation like a PowerPoint at the session if that's not how you want to use your time. But if you would like to have one, the tech is there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Natasha?
Yes.
Can you talk a little more about the discussant part? Because is it how you envision both having guiding questions and then weaving expertise into kind of the discussion?
Sure. It's funny because I think about it as a similar way to how I mostly engage in the classroom, right? So we assign readings, and sometimes, hopefully, when we do that, we don't go reading to reading saying, in this reading, let's look at this point exactly, right? But we maybe look across the readings for some key points, key ideas that really draw attention to a broader concept, right, for us to be grappling with. And so depending on, because you are the discussant for the Greek life session, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so given the topics of the papers, right, you might draw on, what are the problems of practice that they've identified in their papers, right? And then, given your knowledge and your scholarly and practical expertise in Greek life, right? Like you might come up with some questions that make sense around how these two papers help us do something differently in our practice, or think differently about whatever the concepts are in the papers. You know what I'm saying? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't need to be like these overly crafted, overly complicated questions. They're just really questions to guide discussion. And again, it's 30 minutes, so I'm not envisioning that discussants create a list of like 10 questions. You don't have that kind of time. But
Perfect.
also, as I said, most people in the audience have, questions or thoughts.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. And the other, I think, difference here is that we want for those of you who are authors to be able to actually gather some feedback from the audience, not just the discussant. So like one of the things I think about is that, the audience will not have read the paper, but the discussants will. And the presenters may not, go in depth about their methodological and methods choices. But as the discussant, you'll have read that and you can maybe draw some questions from that, right, for the audience and researchers to be thinking about together. Other thoughts or questions or concerns?
Actually, yeah, I had a question. So I have a couple other people on the paper with me. How many presenters can we have sort of up there talking about the paper?
Great question. I imagine that given that it's only 10 minutes, like we don't have like any sort of hard, fast, like only one person can present. We don't have that. But I imagine given that it's only 10 minutes, you want to make the most use of your time. And so if you can transition through 4 presenters in 10 minutes, do it. If you feel less confident about that as you practice, beforehand, and you only want 2 folks to do it, then that's completely up to you.
Okay, thank you.
You can certainly introduce all of the authors if everyone is in the audience, right, before you start.
Great.
Natasha, this is Dawn. Quick question. Will we know ahead of time which of the 2 papers will be presented first for our session?
What you can do is, so each grouping, so presenters and discussants should have received an email, right, with more information, with this call information and with the papers attached for the discussants to access. And so one of the things you could do, Dawn, is just reply all to that email and figure out ahead of time which group wants to go first, or which paper wants to go first. We don't have a set, one paper should go first over the other.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. What I've seen happen in the past is that when everyone shows up, they kind of discuss in that moment, like who's going first. I've seen that where there's an actual quick little discussion. I've also seen whoever gets there first and sets up PowerPoint first decides for everyone that they're going first. So it really is however you all want to decide that. But both papers should present first and then enter into discussion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tasha, I have a random question. It's more about logistics. So I
Mhm.
think our honorable Supreme Court justice is giving her keynote immediately before our first scholarly session, and so do we expect that to impact? I'm just thinking of traveling. What's the distance or travel distance between conference center and the Sheraton? I don't have much knowledge of Philadelphia.
Yeah. So I remember it probably being about a 7 to 8 minute walk. Daniel, do you have that
Yeah,
information?
so the Sheraton, I can't tell you exactly, I haven't been on site for it, but the Sheraton is connected to the convention center, as is the Marriott. They are connected. Unfortunately, if you are at one end of it and are trying to get to the convention center, it is, I think, from the Sheraton to the Marriott, which is one end of the block, through the convention center to the other end, is about 0.8 of a mile. So it definitely can be a bit of a trek, but the convention center thankfully sits right in the middle. So it's not that full trek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were on site, and I feel like it probably took us a little longer to get there because we were strolling and looking at things. But if you're walking with a purpose, you've probably got a solid 8 minute walk or so. Any other questions or concerns? We'll probably also, this is just an FYI, we'll probably also be looking for feedback from presenters and discussants. So this year, as I mentioned, all of the scholarly papers are in one hotel. And so that is something new in terms of like just everything being in one location. And I think as part of the planning team, it was like everything faculty related was put into one location. So we'll just be looking for feedback on whether folks think that having these all in one place is helpful. So for example, last year, they were all in the same room in the same place, but then I think the year before that, they were more spread out, across spaces. So just a logistical thing. If we find that, this doesn't work or it works really well, we'll probably get some feedback around that. This will also be the first time that we tap administrators with terminal degrees to be discussants, and so and the first time that we have some pairs. So we'll also be looking for feedback on whether or not that works.
Natasha, I have a question for you. Can I stay on at the end of our discussion with the group and ask you a few questions?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to be cognizant of folks' time. And so if there are no other questions or concerns at this point, know that you can contact via email me or Nathan with any questions you have about scholarly papers at any time you need to. But other than that, we are very excited for those of you who are doing the good work and presenting your papers. Those of you who are serving as discussants, thank you in advance. And we will meet again in Philadelphia in 2 weeks or so.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me, I should probably get a plane ticket. Yes, 2